I want to get into what is not going to be asked at the debate. Not that I'm so great, but let's say I would ask a lot of questions that you're not going to get from Lester Holt. Nothing against Lester Holt. Seems like a nice guy, but he's your average, network anchor stiff who reads from a teleprompter and asks horse race nonsense questions. So, you're pretty much, I'd say you might get a few substantive questions, but you're not going to get really the most important questions or actually getting any of the candidates pressed to get answers. So let me tell you what I think it won't be asked that should be asked. We'll start with Hillary Clinton. I want to know, Mrs. Clinton, in 1996, you said you're proud to have been a Goldwater girl. Obviously, in Hillary Clinton's youth, she worked as a volunteer, I believe, for Barry Goldwater's campaign. So as First Lady, you were still saying you were proud to be a Goldwater girl. You wrote for Henry Kissinger's book that you consider him a friend. You have talked about the fact that you, when you become president, want to have drinks and dinners with Republicans and really go across the aisle. You have, when your husband was president, pushed measures that 20 years later are considered fairly Republican in nature: welfare reform, the crime bill, among other things. So all these things, you say you're a progressive that gets things done, but most progressives didn't support Barry Goldwater. Most progressives are not friends with Henry Kissinger. What do you feel makes you a progressive, because your record is rather conservative? Seems like a long-winded question, but it's legitimate. I mean, do you know many progressives who, are BFF with Henry Kissinger or are proud to have been a Goldwater guy or gal? I don't. I'd also ask Hillary Clinton. You say climate change is one of the biggest threats around the country. You were silent on the pipeline being built in North Dakota, the Dakota Access Pipeline. Jill Stein went down there. You said nothing. You also, it's on record, pushed fracking around the world as Secretary of State. You also are not on record with a yes or no whether you would outlaw fracking. Do you believe that fracking is a good thing in terms of fighting climate change? And do you disagree with many notable scientists and environmental activists that fracking is one of the most dangerous things that is going to accelerate climate change? I'd like to know, because Hillary Clinton has been on every side of the issue with fracking. She gave a mixed word salad in regards to whether she would outlaw fracking. When Bernie Sanders was asked, he said, yes, I would. So I'd like to know that, Hillary Clinton. I'd also like to know, you deplore your opponent for his rhetoric towards minorities, Latinos, African Americans. You, as a senator, voted for voted for further means testing for welfare under President George W. Bush. You also, as Secretary, in 2008, you criticized President Obama, then Senator Obama, for not being for mandatory minimum sentences. You also, obviously in the 90s, pushed the crime bill, which put record numbers of African Americans in prison. You pushed welfare reform, which threw single mothers and very low-income minority people off the welfare rolls. So you might say Donald Trump is deplorable in his actions, deplorable in his words, but isn't your record not so great for African Americans? What can you cite that you've done for African Americans and Latinos? And what specifically are you going to do for them? Past increased take-home pay and, these words. What is the meat and bones of this? I also want to know from Hillary Clinton, we could get into the nitty-gritty on emails and, this and that, but you are known as somebody who likes to keep things private, as somebody who, has tried to skirt the rules within the law, let's say. If you become president, President Obama said he wanted one of the most transparent White Houses in American history. Based on your record, why should anyone think that your White House would be transparent. What measures are you going to take to be transparent? I'd like to know that. I'd also like to know, for Hillary Clinton, you say that no ground troops in Iraq and Syria. None. Just not going to happen. Well, I'd like to know, will you unequivocally say right now that you won't be sending any special advisors to Syria, Iraq, Iran, any of the Middle East? Will you say, no matter what the title, you will not be sending American military personnel to any Middle East countries? Can you outlaw that? Because you might not be sending ground troops, but President Obama has sent more special advisors. I'd also ask Hillary Clinton, you say I never did anything for donors to the Clinton Foundation. Sure, they have my ear. I took meetings, but I never actually. There's no proof that I made decisions based on that. I'd like to know, Hillary Clinton, why was your husband 10 out of 13 speeches he gave worth more than $500,000 a pop? 10 out of those 13 came after you became Secretary of State. I'd like to know, why is it that a hedge fund manager named Raj Fernando from Chicago was appointed to a special National Security Advisors Board while you were Secretary of State? What qualifications did Mr. Fernando have that made you feel he would be a very valuable asset next to nuclear scientists and other national security advisors? Why would a hedge fund person be an expert? Let's not. Did it have anything to do with the $3 million he's donated to you over your career? I'd like to know that. Why is it that many of your Clinton Foundation donors and donors to your campaign have also then worked on your campaign, or worked in your Senate office, or worked for President Clinton in his office? Why is it that, again, while you were Secretary of State, it seems that your family personally made money off of it? Why is it that when you were Secretary of State, there was a coup in Honduras to overthrow the democratically elected liberal president? There was a coup there to overthrow him, which you supported. Not publicly, but behind closed doors. WikiLeaks cables show you supported overthrowing this democratically elected president of Honduras. Why is it in Haiti the overwhelming majority voted to raise the minimum wage to $5 a day, which is pathetic anyway, and you and your State Department behind closed doors worked to make sure that minimum wage never went up? Can it have anything to do with companies that donated to your foundation that had shops over there making garments, didn't want the minimum wage to go up? I mean, I could go on and on and on, but these are just some of the questions I would ask. I would also ask, because I think a lot of moderators just go by default to the Iraq question, but there's also other things to her vote in Iraq that have never really been challenged. There is something called the Levin Amendment. Carl Levin was I believe he was a Democratic senator, might have been a congressman. Anyway, there was a Levin Amendment that he proposed before the vote for Iraq that would have made, we could not go to war until the weapons inspection process was finished. Mind you, we went to war, they were still inspecting. They weren't done. So Congressman Levin or Senator Levin, I don't remember, proposed, let's make it that we have to finish weapons inspection before we do anything. Novel concept. Hillary Clinton voted against that. I'd also like to know, Hillary Clinton, you say you made the best decision you could based on all the information at your disposal. Well, there's something called the National Intelligence Estimate. Now, the National Intelligence Estimate, there were two versions, a classified version and a non-classified version. The non-classified version, basically the Bush administration put together, and it was just their propaganda on, mushroom clouds, and definitely slam dunk, they have weapons. The classified version, which was 90 pages, was an aggregate of all of the intelligence agencies in the government, their intelligence on Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, all this stuff. all U.S. congressmen and senators had the opportunity to read the National Intelligence Report. The National Intelligence Estimate. It was classified, so you had to go into a special room somewhere on the Capitol to read it. Well, 6 lawmakers read it. 6. Guess which one was not one of them? Guess if Hillary Clinton read it or not? No, they did not. She did not. And Congressman Robert Byrd and one other guy that I read, at least 2 lawmakers who read it said that changed their vote from a yes to a no on the Iraq War. Specifically, there was strong objections from the Energy Department and the State Department. One of the major things was about uranium capabilities, uranium enrichment, which we know, yellow tubes and all this business that Dick Cheney forced to be in the wording when Colin Powell went up to push the case for war. Well, the National Intelligence Estimate was so convincing that several lawmakers changed from yes to no. Hillary Clinton did not take the time to read it, 90 pages. She was briefed by the people who wrote it, but she didn't take the time to read it. So somebody who voted against legislation that would have made it, you couldn't go to war unless the weapons inspection was done. Also in that amendment was proposal that we should get a coalition among the United Nations together before we take military action. She voted against that too. So it wasn't just that she voted against Iraq. She did nothing she did not do all her homework, and she also did not do everything that could have been done diplomatically. Apparently, sending ground troops was the first phase of diplomacy. So I'd like to know all those things. I'd also like to know, as senator, can you name one major accomplishment of yours as senator? Not jumping on to be a co-sponsors of bills, this and that. What did you personally as a senator get through and push through? Because based on my research, she pushed through renaming a highway, renaming a post office. What did you do in the U.S. Senate? I'd also like to know, when you talk about you're going to help average Americans, when you talk about you're going to help, struggling middle-class people, how does that coincide with your support for NAFTA, with you calling the Trans-Pacific Partnership the gold standard? Because many, many economists and most voters on both sides feel that free trade has pretty much destroyed the middle class in America, but you're on record as supporting NAFTA, TPP. You say you don't now. So what exactly is it you're going to do to help raise middle income wages or bring back jobs that were offshored? And did you make a mistake on NAFTA and these things? What has changed? What evidence have you been confronted with that has made you change on trade? What specifically about the TPP has made you change to a no? I'd like to know those things. So, I mean, if I had more time, I could go on and on. None of these things are going to be asked because it's going to be very big on the horse race. Lester Holt's going to try to, create an atmosphere where they could go at it, and it's going to be like a boxing match. So not many of those things will be asked, and it's unfortunate. I mean, you could go on with Hillary, Can you explain what you saw while you were Secretary of State that made you try to push President Obama to arm the rebels way earlier than he ultimately did? What did you see in Afghanistan that made you tell President Obama you should really send 40,000 troops? He ultimately decided 30,000. What did you see when you pushed and were the main cheerleader for trying to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in Libya? When you say, war is a last effort, war is a last resort, how does that coincide with your record that seems to be act first, think later? So all these are very, if you know the record, very simple things that will not be asked as far as Hillary Clinton. Moving over to Donald Trump, which, oh Lord, you could have a whole debate just with him. I'd like to ask just simply, Mr. Trump, in 2009, you applauded President Obama for his stimulus act. In 2009, you also complimented him on the choice of Hillary Clinton. And then in 2011, you started questioning whether President Obama was born in America and essentially started speaking like you were a member of the self-described Tea Party. What specifically changed in you? Because you're also on record as being for an assault weapons ban in 2000, being pro-choice in 2000, being a fairly, being a Democrat. What changed in you to make you such a fierce critic of President Obama and Hillary Clinton? Was it, reading the tea leaves that there was a new movement starting of the Tea Party? Because it seems like a switch went off in you from 2009 and 10 to 2011 and 12. It's a very simple question, which I would like to know. I'd also like to know, Mr. Trump, you made a claim that you personally saw thousands of Muslims cheering on a rooftop in New Jersey on September 11th. Followed up by that, you were not able to provide any video. You were not able to provide any evidence that existed. Did you lie, or were you just having a dream? I'd like to know that, Mr. Trump. I'd like to know, you claim that John McCain was not a hero. He was not a war hero because he was captured. Would you say the same thing about you? If you were captured, let's say you were kidnapped, or, something happened to one of your children where they were kidnapped, where they lost something, were they also, in war? Would they also not be heroes? Would you not be a hero? Or was this just a political opponent you wanted to slur? I'd like to know, when you talk about that you've made millions of jobs, you've made millions of dollars, what exactly did you build for middle class workers? Because it seems like your workers on the bottom level, reports show many of them not paid. You stiffed many of your contractors, and you pretty much made money off the backs of low income or middle class workers without really paying them a just wage, or even paying all your contractors. So how does that example set for you as president? I'd like to know, you say you want to be, you say you don't want to give away your strategy for defeating ISIS, this and that. Well, you have seemed to have been on both sides of this issue. In some debates you said, we got to stop trying to topple dictators all across the world. It spent trillions of dollars. Let's start rebuilding airports, hospitals, roads. On other debates you said, bomb, bomb, bomb. We got to bomb the shit out of them. I'm gonna, I'll beat ISIS in 10 minutes. Well, those two things don't jive with one another. So if you don't want to give away your plan, what is your strategy? Is it to fiercely go against ISIS, or to be more isolationist and focus on American problems? Because the overwhelming appetite for America is not to continue engaging in countries around the world. I would like to know that. Mr. Trump, you have claimed you are a friend of women. You are you'll be the best for women's health and all these things. Can you name some females, some strong women leaders that are kind of you admire and would even try to model yourself after, and explain why? Guarantee you can't name one. Maybe Margaret Thatcher, he would say. I'd like to know, with Donald Trump, you fundamentally have talked about, Mexican immigrants, they are undocumented immigrants, are killing people. Americans are at risk. Now, you want to do something about that. It seems that you're not as concerned about American citizens shooting up schools, shooting up movie theaters, shooting up Planned Parenthoods, if they're white, conservative, this and that. Do you see the same threat in terms of that? And what are you going to do about that? I'd like to know. Because isn't death just death? Isn't murder murder? Whether it's undocumented immigrants coming in and doing it, or your average Fox News viewer going up and shooting a school. So, Mr. Trump, what are you going to do about the mass shooting epidemic? Mr. Trump, when you say you're going to be the law and order candidate, and you like to cite Chicago and all these things, what specifically are you going to do to make sure people in Chicago and other places have books in their hands instead of guns, or have money in their hands instead of guns? What programs are you from day one going to do to lift African American youth unemployment and bring back jobs is not an answer. How are you going to do it specifically? And we're not moving on to another question until I hear a specific. I'd like to know. I'd also like to know, what evidence do you have now that has made you decide that President Obama is an American citizen? I know you sent your folks to Hawaii to investigate. What did you find? Because obviously there's new evidence if now you think he's an American citizen. I'd love to know that. Mr. Trump, you talk about you're going to do a lot for veterans, all these things. Could you tell me how much money you have donated to veterans in your business career? And what specific programs do you have that will help fix the Veterans Department and Administration? And what specifically are you going to do, not just for physical ailments, but mental illness? Not just for veterans, but around the country. Mental illness is a big topic that it would be that we get platitudes about after shootings, but there doesn't seem to be a plan for mental illness. I'd also like to know, fundamentally, with Mr. Trump, you seem to have a hard time acknowledging mistakes and errors. Could you name one or two of the biggest mistakes you've made in this campaign or just in your life and what you learned from them? I'd like to know. Lastly, with Trump, I'd like to know if a bunch of Jewish people started shooting up schools, whatever, would you outlaw Jewish people from immigrating into America, or Catholic people? Would you outlaw if, 20 Irishmen shot up a few bars? Would you outlaw Irish immigration? I'd like to know that. Is it just Muslim people, or is this something you'd be consistent on if we started seeing an epidemic in other races or cultures? None of these questions are going to be asked. Oh, I'd also love to ask Donald Trump, you say there's no evidence for climate change. You're a businessman. Are you also a scientist that disagrees with 99% of the people? I mean, with Trump, you could just go on and on and on. But something I would do, I know it's a debate and you got to keep moving, I wouldn't move on to the next question. This outdated rules, 30 seconds, and then you move on. No. You don't move on until you get an answer. And if they're not going to give you an answer, you as the moderator say, okay, well, the audience can decide. Mr. Trump chose not to answer that or chose dishonestly. The bottom line is, when you live in a media bubble that's all about the horse race and all about sound bites and all about zingers, and let's not make a mistake, debate moderators, this is a career-defining moment. They're not there for substance. They're there for theater. They're there for the scoreboard. Who's up, who's down, who might come away from this debate as, game-changing, all that business. You're not going to get a lot of substance out of it. So I think really the main thing is, if you decide to watch it, is how far will the race to the bottom go? Hillary Clinton's going to be scripted. She's going to be rehearsed. She's going to throw out platitudes. She's going to point out how Donald Trump has lied over and over, how he said racist things. And Donald Trump is going to try to stay as vague as possible. He's going to try to act tough. I think he's going to point out how her corruption, how he was involved with that, how he gave her money and she did X, Y, and Z. But if you're looking for substance, not going to get it there. You will get it watching me, First John, on Fusion tonight.